What terrifying secret has someone told you while intoxicated? It was a late fall evening when I stumbled upon the strangest conversation of my life. I was in an old, dilapidated bar on the outskirts of the city, where an elderly man sat next to me, and his first words were a soft whisper. "Have you ever heard of those who did not return?" I looked at him, not knowing if I should talk to him. He introduced himself as Daniel. After a few minutes of conversation, he began to tell me a story I will never forget, so strange that it seemed like a fever dream. Daniel was a sailor, traveling all over the world. One night he found himself on a small, uncharted island in the Caribbean. He described the night as calm, almost too quiet. He and his girlfriend had just gone to bed when the boat rocked gently. At first Daniel thought it was just the tides, but then he heard it again, a gentle, almost imperceptible impact on the hull. His intuition told him something was wrong. He grabbed his gun and headed up the narrow stairs to the deck, his feet moving silently, instinctively. He could feel the hair on the back of his neck standing up. When he reached the deck, his eyes were immediately drawn to the figure of a man climbing up the side of the boat, clutching a long rifle. Daniel did not hesitate. He fired 2 quick shots. The attacker fell, disappearing over the railing into the dark water below. But when Daniel looked over the side, he saw something even more terrifying: a second man, armed and ready to fire. With no time to think, Daniel fired again, hitting the second man. It seemed that danger was approaching from all sides. He quickly raised the anchor and sailed off into the night, leaving the quiet island and everything that was hiding on it far behind. Daniel's voice trembled as he explained that piracy was commonplace in these parts, but what he hadn't expected was the brutality that followed. These were not ordinary thieves. These were people who would board your ship, tie you up, steal everything of value, and then set your ship on fire while you were on board. And the worst part? The impact he heard earlier? It was another boat approaching him. He barely managed to escape, and he never felt safe in these waters again. As I listened to Daniel, a cold shiver ran through my body. It seemed like the world was closing in on me. Daniel was not just telling an old sailor's tale. No, it was a warning. The kind of warning that seeps into your bones, reminding you that danger can come from the most unexpected places. "I never went back," Daniel said, his voice softer. "Not to those waters, not to that madness." I sat there, the weight of his words settling in my stomach like a stone. Something was wrong with this whole story, something I couldn't understand. When Daniel left the bar, I turned to the bartender, hoping for some kind of explanation. The bartender just looked at me with a smile. This man? He's not the first person to tell me this story. He paused, his eyes narrowed. "You might want to watch your boat if you plan on sailing in these parts." I laughed nervously, but deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel's story was more than just a fairy tale. It was a warning, and somehow I had a feeling that it wasn't over yet. Story 2. A few years ago, my father came to me a little drunk and tried to talk to me about my depression, which was something new for us. It was something new for us, and it was hard for me to open up when he started crying out of the blue. I had never seen my dad cry until he told me that he and my mom had met when she was a dancer and he was a bartender at the same club. In the same club, he admitted that he always regretted where they came from and that they also struggled with drug addiction. Before my mom got pregnant with me, he said he wanted to take my pain away and deal with it himself because he knew what it was like. He kept talking about how desperately he wanted our family to be financially stable and happy, and that he would do anything to make me feel better, even though I saw him as a slightly annoying father. I saw him as a slightly annoying father and never got close to him, but after that day I took the time to really get to know him. Now he's more than just my father, he's my best friend, and the fact that he was drunk that day and opened up to me is the reason we have a healthy relationship. Is the reason why I have such a healthy relationship with him today. Story 3. In my freshman year of college, one of my new friends was a guy who was always the fool in the group, very laid back, very casual, always. The most disturbing thing we noticed about him was that when people were drinking and having fun, he would always completely shut down. He'd drink too much and stumble around like a rag doll, barely able to keep his feet on the ground. One night, when the party was over, some of us, also drunk, asked him why he always drank so much and spoke so slurred. He had drunk so much that he could barely stand up and said something that left us speechless. A few months before, in the summer before college, he got a call from his best friend. They lived in a small beach town and his friend asked him to meet him to watch the sunset by the water. Without thinking about it, he came by bike. He rode up on his bike, sat down and they talked for a while. Everything was fine. Until his friend suddenly pulled out a gun and shot himself in the head without warning. He died instantly. My friend had to call the police when he was covered in blood, completely shocked, with bone and brain fragments. And a few weeks later, still in disbelief, he left for college in another state, unable to sleep, focus, or think about what had happened. He never recalled telling us this story, and none of us ever wanted to mention his drinking. His habits didn't change until his senior year, when he finally started going to therapy. And from what I've seen over the years, he seems to have gotten better. Story 4. In my freshman year of college, I had a new friend who was always the goofball in the group, very laid back, easygoing, always made us laugh. The most disturbing thing we noticed about him was that when people were drinking and having fun, he always completely withdrew into himself. He would drink too much and stumble around like a rag doll, barely able to stand. One night, when the party was over, some of us, also drunk, asked him why he always drank so much and spoke so slurred. He had drunk so much that he could barely stand up and said something that left us speechless. A few months before, in the summer before college, he got a call from his best friend. They lived in a small beach town, and his friend asked him to meet him to watch the sunset by the water. Without thinking twice, he got on his bike and rode to the spot. They sat down and talked for a while. Everything was fine until his friend suddenly did something he never expected. Out of the blue, his friend told him that he felt like he was drowning in life and needed help. He said that he had been struggling with depression for a long time, but didn't know how to ask for support. My friend was completely shocked, and before he could realize it, his friend simply broke down in front of him. In this chaos, my friend had to stay there, talk to him, calm him down until they could call someone who could help. It was a long and exhausting night. This moment haunted him for several weeks and he could not forget it. A few weeks later, he left for college in another state, still shaken and unable to sleep, focus, or think clearly. He never remembered telling us this story, and none of us ever wanted to mention his drinking. His habits didn't change until his senior year, when he finally started going to therapy. And from what I've seen over the years, he seems to have gotten better, slowly but surely. Story 5. Thanksgiving 2 years ago was one of those holidays when it seemed like anything could happen. The house was buzzing with the usual chatter and clinking of silverware, and the smell of turkey was in the air. I was surrounded by my family, but something was wrong, something I couldn't understand. It was my brother. I could see it in the way he was holding himself, the way his laugh seemed forced, the way his smile didn't reach his eyes. I had always brushed things like this off, thinking it was just the usual family chaos that got to him, but this time it was different. He wasn't the carefree guy I grew up with, the one who was always so easygoing. My brother and I had a lot in common. We went through hardships and trials together, but that night something changed. Around midnight, when everyone was satisfied with the food and alcohol, my brother clearly crossed the line. He was no longer just drunk, he was very, very drunk. It started with him laughing too loudly, telling stories that no one asked for. But then, in an instant, his mood changed. One minute he was joking about something random, and the next minute his eyes were filled with tears and his face was crumpled as if a heavy thing had just fallen on him. At first, I didn't know what to do. The change in him was so sudden, so unexpected. He got up from the table, mumbling something about needing to get some air, but his legs were unsteady. I looked at him for a moment, not knowing whether to intervene. Then, just as quickly as he left the room, he returned, fell onto the couch in front of me, hiding his face in his hands, and muffled sobs escaped between his fingers. Without hesitation, I sat down next to him, my heart pounding. "My friend, are you okay?" Finally, his voice broke, barely above a whisper. "I don't know what's wrong with me, man. I've been thinking about it a lot lately," he said, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "I've been thinking about ending it. A lot. It's not even that I'm angry at the world or feel like a failure. It's just this emptiness, this constant pain that never goes away. Why didn't you say something earlier?" I asked in a barely audible whisper. "I didn't want to leave you alone. I don't want to be the reason you feel like you're stuck here. You're the only thing keeping me from doing something stupid." His words hit me like a punch in the gut. It took everything in me not to break down. I did not realize how deeply he was suffering, how much he was carrying. We have always been there for each other, but somewhere along the way I missed the signs. At first, I didn't know what to say, but eventually I said, "You don't have to go through this alone." "You are not alone, my friend. I am here. Always." He nodded, but there was a sadness in his eyes that I couldn't shake. He looked like he was struggling with something inside of him, something that had been festering for too long. Then, out of nowhere, his expression changed. He straightened up, wiped his eyes, still sniffling, and for a moment it seemed that he was going to change the conversation to something lighter, to make a joke. But instead he said, "Do you remember when I was 6 years old and I put gum in your hair?" I rolled my eyes in confusion. "What? Gum? I don't remember that." He choked on a sob, his voice cracking as he began to speak faster. "I was a terrible brother, always causing problems. You didn't deserve this. You didn't deserve all the stupid things I did when we were kids. I can't believe I did that. I ruined your hair." "Are you serious?" I don't even remember that. It wasn't a big deal, dude. I ended up with short hair anyway. It wasn't that bad. But he couldn't stop. No, it was bad. I ruined everything for you, and I can't fix it. I just keep thinking about it, about how I let you down. You deserved better. I'm sorry, but it didn't matter. His tears continued to flow, and no matter how many times I assured him that it didn't mean anything, just a stupid childhood memory, it didn't seem to change anything. The next morning I had a long conversation with him. It wasn't easy, but I finally convinced him to see a therapist, to start taking the antidepressants he had been avoiding for so long. I told him over and over again that he was loved, that he was important, things I should have said long before, things I didn't even realize he wanted to hear. From that night on, he didn't get drunk anymore. He became more grounded, more calm, and I saw him smile in a way I hadn't seen in years. I am proud of him, proud of the man he is becoming. And most importantly, I am proud that now, more than ever, he knows that he is not alone in this world. Story 6. It was about 6 months ago, a Friday night when it seems like the work week is dragging on forever, and you just want to relax, have a good time, and forget about everything. My brother and I decided to have one of those evenings, the kind of evening that should be carefree. We opened a few beers, grabbed a game controller, and dusted off an Old World at War Zombie CD to get nostalgic. I was reaching for the salsa when my brother, in his usual vague tone, said something that stopped me in my tracks. I need to tell you something, he said, his voice unsteady. I turned to him, expecting another random comment, maybe some more rambling about the game we were playing or how his fingers were starting to cramp from holding the controller too long. But his expression was different. Something was wrong, he was serious, almost too serious for a night like this. He paused for a second, his eyes searching for the right words. And then he said to me, I overdosed a month ago, he said, his voice quiet, as if the words themselves meant more than anything else he could say. I took too many pills. I thought I was done. My heart stopped for a moment, my stomach clenched. I wasn't sure I understood him correctly. What? What? No, dude. No, dude, you're not. I fell silent, trying to comprehend what he said. He didn't meet my eyes. His gaze was fixed on the floor, as if he couldn't look at me, or maybe he just didn't want to see the shock on my face. They had to pump my stomach, he continued, his voice lower, as if he was talking more to himself than to me. All this time I was thinking about you. How devastated you would be if I didn't survive. And I couldn't do that to you. I didn't want to leave you behind. I sat there, frozen, my hand still clutching the salsa jar, as the weight of his words hit me. I didn't know what to say. This was not just some bad joke. It was for real. This was my brother, a man I had known all my life, but I had no idea how deep his pain was. For a moment, none of us spoke. The room was too quiet, as if the noise of the world had disappeared. I could feel the seriousness of his confession and the truth of what he had been through. But then, something shifted inside me. Without thinking, I uttered the words I had been hiding for so long, words I had never confessed to anyone before. You're not the only one, dude, I said, my voice filled with emotion. I tried it too. A long time ago. I don't know what I was thinking, but the only thing that stopped me was the thought of you. I couldn't do that to you. I couldn't leave you behind. His eyes widened in shock, and for a second I wondered if he had even heard me. But then he did the last thing I expected, he stretched out his hand and hugged me tightly. We didn't say anything else for a long time. There was no need for it. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, we truly opened up to each other, exposing what we had been hiding deep inside. That night, we talked about everything, our regrets, our fears, the things we had never had the courage to admit. We talked about times when we felt invisible, about the burden of expectations placed on an older brother, about responsibilities that often seemed suffocating. It was not easy. It was rough, even painful, but it was also a turning point, the moment when we finally saw each other not just as brothers, but as people who struggled in their own way, silently fighting the same battles. After that night, we made a promise. A promise that we would always be there for each other, no matter what. We promised to talk every day, even on the hardest days, even when we don't feel like it. And we have kept that promise every day since. We both started therapy, which we should have done years ago. But now we feel that we are doing it not only for ourselves, but also for each other. It's been a long road, but we're both much better now. And every time I hear from him, every time we share moments of laughter or even difficult conversations, I am reminded of how far we have come and how much we still have to give each other. It's nice, to have someone you can really trust, someone who knows your worst sides and still chooses to stay by your side. Story 7. My great-grandfather never talked about his participation in World War II. Not even once. Not a single word. When I was a kid, I used to ask him questions, interesting, innocent questions about what it was like, about the places he saw, about the battles he took part in. But every time I did, he would just get up, take his drink, and leave the room. The silence that followed was always heavier than the words he refused to say. I realized early on that the past was something he kept deep inside him, and some stories were never meant to be told. But when I went to Afghanistan myself, everything suddenly changed. When I returned from my first tour, something changed between us. For the first time in my life, my great-grandfather called me. When I picked up the phone, his voice cracked, and for a moment I wondered if I had heard him wrong. He was never one for long phone calls, but that day was different. "I think I can finally talk to someone," he said softly, his voice quiet and almost hesitant. It was the first time I had ever heard him say something like that. And just like that, a door opened, a door I never expected to walk through. Over the next few months, I spent more time with him than ever before. We drank together, played cards, and exchanged stories. I told him about my experiences, about what I had seen and done in Afghanistan, the brotherhood, the fear, the brutality. And in response, he began to share his own stories, which he hadn't talked about for decades. One evening, when I was on vacation, we were sitting together, just the two of us, over a bottle of whiskey. We drank shot after shot, the conversation flowing like the drink in our glasses. But then, as night fell, his mood changed. He became quiet, almost distant, as if the memories were coming back to him, uncontrollably, and he couldn't stop them. "I've never told anyone this," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "but this is something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. During the war, my unit came across a small concentration camp. Not all of them were as massive as Auschwitz, but what we found, it was worse than anything I had ever seen." I listened in fascination as he began to recount the details of that moment, details he had never shared with anyone. He said that the first thing he remembered about that camp was the smell. It was so overwhelming, so thick with decay, that he almost threw up on the spot. The stench of death and disease was so pervasive that it haunted him for days after they left. Unlike the large camps, there were no gas chambers or ovens, he explained. But what was there was even worse, a huge pit on the north side of the camp filled with thousands of decomposing bodies. His voice shook as he described the scene, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached for his drink. "The ones down there," he said, barely audible, almost a whisper, "had already turned into skeletons. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. The Nazis executed people at random, lined them up, shot them, and just let their bodies fall into this pit. Some of the prisoners, some of them were so weak, so hungry, that they threw themselves in there, hoping to end it. They thought the fall would break their necks." My stomach twisted into knots as I listened, unable to shake the vivid picture of what he was describing. But what happened next was even more haunting. When my great-grandfather's unit arrived, the Nazis had already left the camp. They locked the gates, took away whatever was left of the food, poisoned the remaining water, and threw even more corpses into the water to make sure that all the survivors would eventually die of disease. The air was thick with the stench of rotting flesh, and the infection had already spread throughout the camp. Soldiers from his unit were afraid to even approach, he told me. Some of them were so afraid of getting infected that they refused to touch anything, let alone the survivors. But what tore him apart, what haunted him for the rest of his life, was something he could not forget: the look in the eyes of the survivors. The way they looked at him and his unit, not with gratitude, but with something dark, something that haunted them, something that none of them could ever shake off. "It was the worst thing I saw during the war," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "And since then, it hasn't left me every day. The suffering, the despair, the way these people lived and died. It seemed to me that we were not doing enough. Every time we failed to move forward, I couldn't help but think that it was another day that they had to go through even more. And I couldn't save them." There was a long pause. He sat with an empty glass, his face clouded by the weight of his memories. We both sat in silence for what seemed like hours, the air thick with the weight of his words. It was clear that no matter how much time passed, these ghosts would never leave him. My great-grandfather was proud of his service. He lived a full life, and he was happy with it. But that evening, as we sat together, drinking and talking, I saw a side of him I had never known. He was human, after all, a man who had carried the burden of his past for far too long. He died in 2011, peacefully, at home, surrounded by the familiar comforts of his life, watching his favorite show on TV. But I will never forget the stories he shared with me in recent years. They were raw, unfiltered, and brutally honest. And although he lived a full life, there were parts of his soul that were never truly healed. Story 8. I had an ex-boyfriend in college. I say ex because he remained the same. But when I think about him, it's hard for me to just remember the good moments or even the bad ones. Everything is mixed up in this chaotic, often painful mess. There was always something about him that I couldn't quite put my finger on, something missing. He could be charming and cheerful one minute, and then cold and volatile the next. It took me a long time to recognize the signs, but looking back, it all seems so clear. One night, when he was completely drunk, he confessed something to me. To be honest, I think he was so drunk that he didn't even realize he was telling me. He had a habit of getting drunk and then saying whatever came to his mind, usually things he forgot by the morning. But that night was different. What he said stayed with me, and I can't get rid of that image to this day. It was a few years before we met, and I don't know how he even got to this topic, but he started talking about a group of kids he was with, his old friends with whom he was close back then. One night they got drunk and decided to break into a house. The family who lived there had gone on vacation, and they somehow managed to pick the house. He couldn't explain how they knew it would be empty, but in a slurred voice he admitted that they did it just for fun. At first, they were just drinking, hanging out, being typical students. But then someone, he didn't remember who, decided to break the painting on the wall. That moment was enough. One break, one crack. It set off a chain reaction, and before they knew it, the whole group was involved in the destruction. The way he described it was eerie. We smashed everything, he told me, his voice shaking. We just went crazy. We broke windows. We broke everything we could. Chairs, tables, walls, clothes, everything. It was not enough for us to just drink and have fun. We had to destroy it all. He couldn't stop talking, and I couldn't stop listening. His words came out so freely, as if they had been eating away at him for years. It was almost as if he was confessing to me not because he thought it would change anything, but because it was the only way he could exorcise the demons that had haunted him since that night. They tore up the photos, he continued, burned them. They destroyed everything. The life of the family, these people, they came home with nothing. Nothing but ruins. It was all in vain. It's impossible to fix it. The look in his eyes when he said this, the way his face wrinkled as the weight of his confession hit him, he was crying. He sobbed, like a child who finally admitted that he had done something so terrible, so far from atonement, that he could no longer even think about it. And here he was, crying to me, as if confessing could fix what he had done. As if it could somehow fix the mess he helped create. But what really struck me was that he didn't seem to realize how much he was confessing. It was as if alcohol had knocked down all the walls he had built, leaving behind the brutal truth about his actions. And at that moment, it seemed to me that his whole life had come to this desperate, painful truth. They had destroyed what they could not fix. But after that night, nothing changed. We never talked about it again. It was as if the conversation had never happened at all. As if the confession had been just a passing thought in his head, a memory that had faded away with the alcohol in his system. The next day he didn't remember anything. I don't even think he remembered what he had told me. He never mentioned it again, and I never brought it up. It was only much later that I realized he didn't want to talk about it because he couldn't face the gravity of what he had done. A few years later, our relationship became even more gloomy. It was no longer just about drinking. It was about how he treated me, how he thought he could control me. One day, out of the blue, he hit me, just like that. He hit me in the face because I asked him to give me a ride to work, something I had asked for a dozen times? Maybe more. It was not the first time he was violent, but it was the last. I think I finally got tired of pretending that it was all part of his circumstances or his drinking. He was not a good person, not at his core. And that night, when he confessed about the house, about the destruction, about the lives he had ruined, it all started to make sense. It wasn't just alcohol that made him act the way he did, it was something deeper. Something ugly that he could not escape from, no matter how hard he tried to bury it. But no matter how hard he tried to forget, the guilt was there, festering, eating away at him. And for a moment he thought that telling me would somehow free him from it. But it didn't help. After that, I left him. I had to. I could not continue to justify a man who had never once taken responsibility for his actions. He was a liar, a manipulator, and deep down he knew it. That night, that confession, was a glimpse of the person he really was, and it was a side of him that I couldn't live with.